Okay. Yes, I see I'm Traffic Commissioner for the N on the list of speakers here. I suppose I should be grateful that I haven't yet been replaced by a digital Traffic Commissioner, which Paul Clark was talking about earlier. Maybe next year a digital figure or hologram will be here. Was anyone, I gave a talk about 2 weeks ago in an evening to a large group of RHA transport managers. Was anyone at that? Oh, one. Oh, bad luck, sir, because I'm going to give exactly the same speech again. It's a bit like an American president, giving this, or a candidate giving the same speech in 50 different states over the course of a couple of months. Right. Well, here's what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, an overview of what's happening in the Office of the Traffic Commissioner. What's expected of transport managers. I can breeze through that because Carolyn has covered that very in much detail. Same with continuous professional development. A bit on the issues du jour, bridge strikes and mobile phones, brake testing and level playing field. So overview, that's the number of licenses around at the moment. So 36,000 restricted, 25,000 national, blah, blah, blah. This is the kind of stuff that the centre in Leeds is dealing with, the applications, almost 6,000. And then more than 7,500 variations. So if a document occasionally goes missing in Leeds, you can perhaps understand why when they're dealing with 13,000 different processes every year. The latest figures, which are about to come out, I know, Carolyn, you didn't see but the Minister approved it yesterday, the 18-19 report, only 7 months after the end of the year. So. It will be published within the next few days. There were 873 public inquiries over all the traffic commissioners, the 8 areas. I've put the West Midlands figures in brackets for you, so it's 170 on the West Midlands side. 314 revocations. I mean, clearly I'm not doing too well because only 45 of them were mine. So you see how cuddly and nice I am and how gullible I must be. So I'm wondering actually whether the 314 is actually includes out of public inquiry revocations. I'm not absolutely sure. Anyway, I think the point to take home is that if you go to public inquiry, the chances of having your licence revoked are actually quite high. Even in the West Midlands, 1 in 4 licences was revoked. And then there's, as you say, I'm obviously quite hot on disqualifications because 27 out of the operators, out of the 103 were me, and 26 out of 139. So I'm disqualifying well over an eighth of the total. So you may get your licence, but you go out with your licence, but you might be disqualified in the. Right, yes, these are our 2 overarching themes, I suppose, at the Traffic Commission, with traffic commissioners. First of all, we want to make sure that the licensing process is modernised so that if you're a compliant operator, we can get you through the system quickly and effectively without bothering you too much, and then leaving our attention to be focused on the non-compliant. So our objectives at the moment are to have no applications outstanding for more than 6 months. Doesn't sound very good, does it, in a way? But you'd be amazed at the time some applications do take to process. And I think one of the previous speakers said this. It's very important to fill in the application form correctly in the first place, because you'd be amazed at the problems that incorrect applications do cause and the length of time it then takes to iron out those difficulties. There are sections on, have you ever held a licence before? Have you been convicted? Have you appeared at a public inquiry? Has a company you've been involved with gone into liquidation? And people always tick no to all of those questions when the answer is actually yes. Now, there are 2 reasons why they do this. One is they get somebody else to fill in the form and they don't discuss it with them properly, so your bankruptcy 3 years ago isn't picked up. And other people just want to hide the true facts. It's always described to me as, oh, that was just an oversight. Don't know what I was thinking. I didn't really look at it very closely. But the strange thing is that no one ever ticks yes when they mean no. You know, no one ever says, oh yes, I went bankrupt, and yes, I've been convicted, and actually that, you know, the oversight never works that way for some reason. It's always the other way. And there's a serious point here, which is that if you can't be bothered to fill in the application form correctly, you know, it doesn't need an eye for detail, it doesn't need 20 minutes, half an hour of consideration. If you can't be bothered to do that properly, well, you're not going to be bothered to do all the driver defect reporting and the, you know, chasing up prohibitions and looking after your operator compliance risk score, etc., because that needs an attention to detail as well. So there's something about the way you fill in the form that tells me, you know, how likely you are to comply as an operator. So the people who've been outstanding for more than 6 months, mostly it's their fault because they haven't filled in the form correctly and they haven't got their finances together, etc., etc. We want to review the processes to achieve average application times of 35 days. That sounds a long time, 7 weeks, but there's 6 weeks accounted for by the statutory process. The local authorities, the RHA, etc., have 6 weeks to object to your application in the first place. So we can't make it shorter than 6 weeks. We have suggested to the government that they introduce legislation to reduce that period, because I think it's probably too long, and we hardly ever get any objections these days anyway. But of course there's the B word that the government is having to deal with, and they're not going to be producing legislation on that anytime soon. And for those of you who think Brexit's going to be done and dusted within the next few days or weeks, well, there's the next 10 years of negotiations on the new trade arrangement to go through as well. So that, you know, I don't think the government's eye will be taken off that anytime soon. Yeah, there is a bit of a backlog of public inquiries. It's worse in some areas than others. We're trying to reduce the time taken to hear cases to 12 weeks. I think part of the problem there is that in some areas it's very difficult to retain staff, to be quite honest. Where staff can earn better money by moving elsewhere, then they tend to do that. So it's a function of perhaps the government's lack of willingness to pay people the going rate in, say, Cambridge, where wage levels are very high. And then lastly, we're trying to analyse how the commercial vehicle industry is made up so we can focus on particular problem sectors. And there are old age problem sectors, which I see are identified here in one of the banners. Our friends, the scaffolding industry and the skip hire industry, grab hire, that sort of area, where the main business is something else. You know, if you're a scaffolder, your main business is putting up the scaffolding, and then taking it down again at the end. It's not transporting it. So they tend to forget that side. The same with skips. You're mainly interested in waste processing rather than driving the skip to and from the residence or the commercial premises. But these are the operators who don't do it very well, and we're trying to focus on them. How to get through to them. Any scaffolders or skip hire people here today? No, exactly my point, you see. They're not interested in events like this. They're out there, you know, on their site. Yes, well, Carolyn Evans has covered most of this. So a transport manager must exercise continuous and effective management of the business. I would have that above my bed. I mean, I am a qualified transport manager, but I obviously don't practice as such. But if I ever did, I would have that in lights. And I would look every evening to check I was actually performing that. I come across so many transport managers, or companies rather, who say, oh, well, you know, the transport manager, he's at the end of a phone. Well, if you think about it, so are 4 billion other people in the world. They're at the end of a phone as well. You can reach them with one phone call. But they're not transport managers. And it's very difficult to be a transport manager from the other end of a phone. Or to receive a few bits of tachograph data every month on your computer at home, in your bedroom, and the maintenance documents. No, you've got to be out there talking with the drivers, disciplining them, training them, etc., looking at the vehicles. You can't do it from your bedroom, as some people seem to assume they can. It's set out in Stat Doc 3, as Carolyn Evans mentioned. Paragraph 54 is the pertinent one. If you probably won't want to read the whole of Stat Doc 3 because it's actually aimed at traffic commissioners rather than the industry itself. But that particular paragraph does set out in bullet point format what it is that the traffic commissioners expect a transport manager to do. So it covers the waterfront. It's supervise or monitor drivers' hours, for example. A lot of transport managers tell me, well, I only look after the maintenance side. The driver's hours is done by the company or the director or the operator. Well, no, a transport manager should have a view of the whole system, driver's hours and maintenance and driver license or entitlement checking, etc. You can't just focus on one area and assume somebody else is going to do the rest. You're responsible for everything. So as a transport manager, you should expect to have the tools for the job. I mean, the employer should, or the operator should give you the money, time, etc. to actually carry out the job properly. Your performance should be reviewed from time to time by your employer. Again, dovetailing with something Carolyn Evans said, you shouldn't just be left to get on with the job and never have discussions with your director. Knowing your value, again, a typical thing I would come across, I often get transport managers at public inquiries to write on a bit of paper how much they're paid. And then I see the bit of paper, it's £200 a month. And they say, well, you're working 8 hours a week, so that's 40 hours a month. So you're being paid £5 an hour. Is that correct? Because otherwise you should go and get a job as a cleaner or a dog walker and double your salary. Because you can't be working for £5 an hour. You're not working 40 hours a month. You're just being paid £200 to be a name and a license, basically, or to do a few hours of token work. A transport manager should know his or her value. The exam you take is not that easy. The pass rate is only 50%, and you should be paid more than a driver, for example. But many is the transport manager I come across who's paid less than a driver. Well, your skills make you worth more than that. Yes, so much of this is just repeating what Carolyn Evans says, but a two-way communication between operators and drivers is what we need. And the right processes and the right performance indicators. So an operator should know what their prohibition rate is, should know what their MOT pass rate is. You don't have to be a transport manager yourself to be an operator. I mean, that's why you employ one. But you should know enough about the job to know whether he or she is doing a good job or not. And so you need various indicators to help you assess that. This was probably a slide put together for £1 million by a McKinsey consultant. It seems to have crept into the traffic commissioner's presentations, but kind of when I look at the slide like that, well, to be frank, I lose the will to live, so I'm going to pass on and look at evidence of continuous professional development. Yes, this is a new element in, because spurred by the fact that as traffic commissioners, we do come across so often people who've qualified in the 1970s, 80s or 90s, or even acquired rights people. There's still a few of those left. And clearly they've done nothing since then. I mean, I had somebody only last week who was basically in that category. I think his CPC dated from 1986, and he'd clearly not done a stroke since to keep up to date. The week before, I had someone who qualified in the 1970s, and I said, what have you done to keep up to date with changing legislation and developing best practice? And he said, I've been on a 2-day CPC refresher course. Oh, great. When was that? Because I don't see any documents here. Well, it was the day before yesterday and yesterday. So, after 45 years, or whatever it was, 30 years, he'd chosen the 2 days right before the public inquiry. Well, okay, it's better than nothing, but it would have been better had he done it regularly throughout, rather than just to please me at the public inquiry. I mean, it is strange that drivers have to renew their CPC every 5 years now, but not transport managers. So transport managers do need to keep up to date with things. Things do change. Even if the law doesn't change, best practice does. For instance, the Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness has been through 2 or 3 editions in the last 5 years. And it has changed in its recommendations on brake testing, for example, and frequency of having the safety inspections. So you do need to keep up to date with that. So we do ask now for evidence of continuous professional development if you're a transport manager and you haven't acted as such for the last 5 years. So if you're coming back into it after a 5-year break, we say, well, what have you done to keep up to date or to refresh your knowledge for coming back? Or if your qualification's more than 10 years old, if it's 2009 and prior to that, and you haven't done anything, we ask for evidence of you doing something. And again, also, if you're called to a public inquiry. Now, some of the issues, apart from the perennial ones of poor maintenance and poor driver's hours supervision, those are the things that always crop up. Some of the things that have cropped up recently, themes, are bridge strikes. Now, Network Rail have written to traffic commissioners asking us to take this seriously. And I must admit, I wasn't aware of the number of bridge strikes that were occurring until Peter Hendy, the Network Rail chairman, wrote to me. And there are an enormous number of bridge strikes, 2,000 such, and most of them are railway bridges. And they cause an enormous amount of disruption. I mean, not only is there the damage to the bridge and the possible safety effects of a skip toppling over onto the road with a car coming in the opposite direction, but there's the massive delays to the passengers on the trains, all of whom are sitting there for an hour or so, or even more sometimes, while the bridge is being checked to see if it's safe for the trains to carry on going over them. So there's some figures there about the effects of that. Now, what I was surprised about when I started calling in operators to preliminary hearings and drivers to driver conduct hearings was the extent to which operators seem to leave it to the drivers to plan their routes, and the extent to which operators trust their drivers to plan them properly. Now, I've come across drivers who've been using their own car-based sat-nav to plan their routes. Well, obviously that takes you down whatever route, and it doesn't make any allowance to the fact that your vehicle is much higher than the car. There have been drivers who've been left to carry out the conversions from meters to feet on their own. So I got a driver the other day who said, well, I picked up a trailer, and it was a Continental one, and it just said 4 meters. So I multiplied by 3, 12 feet, and put that in my height indicator in the cab. And then I smashed into this 13-foot bridge. Well, yes, you would, because there aren't 3 feet in a metre, are there? You know, that's the obvious thing. But he'd been left by the operator to conduct that kind of rough and ready conversion, which he shouldn't have been. There should have been a conversion chart in the cab. I came across an operator recently whose driver had smashed into a bridge which was half a mile from the operating centre. So, the operator knew that there was this low bridge half a mile away, and yet had taken no special measures to make sure that drivers avoided it. So it's these type of things which one comes across. I do think that if I was a transport manager at an operator, I would be making sure that HGV appropriate sat-navs were in the cab. I think I would be taking a more proactive role in planning the driver's route or planning it with him. Not just saying, you need to deliver at A, B and C. You need to say, well, this is the route you go from A to B, and these are possible diversionary routes, and here are some lower bridges which you need to avoid. You need to be a bit more proactive, I think, than some operators I've seen have been. There is further guidance available. If you just Google bridge strikes Network Rail, it'll pop up with the guidance which tells you a bit more about the various strategies you can adopt to minimise the likelihood of that happening. Mobile phones, I'm still coming across too many drivers who've got mobile phone convictions, both in their car and in their HGV. Sorry, it seems to have... There's no excuse for it now. It isn't just holding your mobile phone to your ear and talking. In fact, that's probably less common now. But it's texting or using your mobile phone for any of the billion things it can be used for. And this slide, which is based on research by Southampton University, I think gets over the point that using a handheld phone, not just for a phone call, but for texting or scrolling through music or whatever, is it slows your reactions by 46%. So it's much worse far worse than being on the drink drive limit, for example. And the eye-opener for me in that slide was that even the hands-free phone, which is legal, of course, is 27% slowing down your reaction. So that's, it's amazing that it's actually better to be high on cannabis than to be using a hands-free mobile phone. But I think that illustrates the point rather starkly, that although it's legal, if you're a responsible employer, you won't phone the drivers even on a hands-free phone while they're driving, and that you really do need to make a policy that drivers can only speak to you and you only speak to them when they're stationary, and somehow achieve that, because there's nothing worse than an employer hustling a driver on the road, and he picks up the phone or even hands-free and starts responding to you and then has a crash. Brake testing, that's another thing which we're pushing at the moment. The slide on the left is from the late 60s, so it shows the roller brake testing is not new. It's not some newfangled thing which has come in the past couple of years, so most operators aren't aware of it. But we're still probably on 90% of the preventative maintenance inspection reports I see from operators, and of course by definition they're at the worst end of the spectrum, aren't they? Because that's why they're before me. But their brake test is the brake test box is either gloriously blank, or it says something like road test, all okay, that type of thing. And this is a 44-ton truck. Well, somebody's been out on it in the road and pressed their foot on the brake and it's roughly come to a stop. It isn't quite good enough. What does the law say? It actually says that every part of the braking system and of the means of operation thereof fitted to a vehicle shall be maintained in good and efficient working order and be properly adjusted. An operator last week said, well, it's not the law to have roller brake tests, is it? I said, well, no, there's no specific law saying thou shalt have a roller brake test every 6 weeks. The law says every part of the braking system must be maintained in a good and efficient working order. And you can't do that just by doing a road test every 6 weeks and putting your foot on the brake. So that's the law, and there must be satisfactory facilities and arrangements for maintaining the vehicles in a fit and serviceable condition. So together, those things I think do mean, as Jason was saying, that earlier on, that a rolling brake test every 6 weeks is the appropriate option. Now, we get various forms of brake tests, which is one up from the putting your foot on the brake and the road test. So we get things like that, which I don't think is in sufficient detail. It's not been laden. The percentages they don't refer to axles, etc. The printout from the roller brake test is what we're looking for. Now, I'll just tell you an anecdote of last week. I had an operator in who I'd seen last year at a public inquiry. Last year at a public inquiry, he just had road test all okay. So I said, no, you need a roller brake test every 6 weeks and an audit. So the audit came in a couple of months ago, no evidence of roller brake testing. Right, back to public inquiry. He got a full set of roller brake test results. I said, oh, okay, well, maybe the auditor must have missed it. And I looked more closely, and I saw that in all these sheets, so he had 3 vehicles, I think, and about 5 or 6 sheets for each vehicle. So I looked at about 15 sheets, and I suddenly realised that the vehicles had been presented at exactly the same weights for each test, and the results were exactly the same for each of the vehicles on each of the different tests. So I'm not an engineer by training, so I rang up my colleague Kevin Rooney, he's the Western Traffic Commissioner. I said, what are the odds on all 3 of these vehicles obtaining the same results at all 6 of their tests, so 18 tests in all? And he said, well, billions to 1. So I looked more closely again, and then I discovered that the things like, I should have put it up really, but the word imbalance was spelt wrong, and what else? Some of the figures were slightly out of alignment. Well, the long and the short of it was that, the other thing I did was I rang up the maintainer. Don't normally do that, but in this particular case I was concerned. So I rang him up and I said, well, have these vehicles been into you on these dates? And he looked at his records and came back to me couple of hours later, said, well, we did see the vehicles the day before yesterday, and we gave them a rolling brake test the day before yesterday. And he emailed me over the results. And of course, from those three charts, from those three results, the operator then copied them to try and show that he'd had roller brake tests throughout the whole year. That wasn't the case. What we're looking for here, now I think these are some actual results with hopefully the registration number blanked out. And you probably can't see the main thing here, which is this blah, 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 blah. I can't see what I have a horrible feeling the weight of the vehicle is not there somewhere, but the measured vehicle weight is 25,000 kilograms there. So it is a laden brake test, which is what we're looking for. Some of them, this one here, it's the same vehicle, but only 11 tons, so that wasn't laden. And as one of the previous speakers has said, the unladen brake test is not really worth having. I suppose it's better than nothing, but it's not giving you proper readout of the efficiency of the brakes on each axle as it should be. So there are various, options for having laden brake tests. There's the thing on the left, I can't even remember what it's called now, but the thing that puts pressure on the flatbed to weigh the vehicle down. There's our water containers. I think ATFs have tractors to use, which you can hitch up to. And there's even the thing on the right here, which pulls the vehicle down and to the correct weight. So there are various options that ATFs have for either having real laden brake tests or simulating laden brake tests, and they're the ones that you should have. So I suppose it's our colleague Kevin Rooney who's got very hot on this in the last year or so. And I must admit, until then, I wasn't sufficiently knowledgeable to know much about it. So I was as guilty as the next man of not really spotting whether a brake test was laden or not. But that is something I now look for. And I am getting operators to undertake to have laden brake tests where I feel that is required. But that's something you need to look out for. Make sure you look at these printouts, and it's quite clear if the vehicle isn't laden. And it also says insufficient load on axle 1, 2, or 3, or whatever. You don't want to see that. Yes, 5 minutes left. Another issue that comes up quite a lot these days, which HMRC are particularly hot about, is self-employed drivers. Does anyone use self-employed drivers? I won't tell HMRC. It's very rare for somebody to be genuinely self-employed as a driver. Really, you need to turn up with the tools of your job, which in the driver's case means a lorry. So in the aggregate industry, there are some, that works in a way where drivers are self-employed because they have their own operator license, they have their own vehicle, and they turn up and drive for tarmac or aggregate industries or whatever. But it only seems to work in that specific industry. Virtually all the other sectors of the industry, although they claim to use self-employed drivers, these drivers are not genuinely self-employed because they turn up and they drive your lorry. And if they don't turn up, they don't supply anybody else in their stead, which they should be doing as a self-employed driver. If they're on holiday or they're ill, you just get somebody else in, don't you? They don't supply the person. So it's very unusual to be a self-employed driver. Do they bear the responsibility for the success or failure of their business? Well, no, they don't, because you're paying them, and they're normally only working for you. Even if they're working for other people, it's no different to somebody having 2 or 3 different part-time jobs. You're not genuinely self-employed if you work for Tesco's in the morning and Waitrose in the afternoon. You're not a self-employed person. You're employed part-time by Tesco and part-time by Waitrose. Let's face it, it's used unscrupulously. It's a way for the employer to get round having to pay pension, having to pay national insurance, and it's a way for the employee to evade tax, because hands up all the people who think that the employee reports religiously to HMRC all the salary he or she gets. So we are beginning to take action. It's on a kind of sliding scale. We're gently pointing people towards sorting it out. So by taking specialist advice from solicitors as to whether these drivers really are genuinely self-employed or not, asking operators to act on that advice, because generally the advice is these are employed people. We have curtailed licences to the number of PAYE drivers that you have, and ultimately we could revoke licences, although that's not yet been done for this specific reason. So if you do use self-employed drivers, I would ask you to at least run it by a lawyer to check that they are properly self-employed. And if they're not, then take action. Phoenix companies, I think this is the last point, or last substantive point. Something, again, that we're looking at, well, we always have looked at, but we're beginning to look at with more attention because they are detrimental to the level playing field that I know that is greatly valued by compliant operators. You know, these are the cases where an operator, a company goes out of business, and we get an application using the same vehicles from the same operating centre. The company's name has changed. It's, you know, instead of Denton Haulage Limited, it's now Denton Haulage brackets GB Limited, something very similar. It's got the same directors. So to all intents and purposes, it's exactly the same company, only the directors have neatly sidestepped all the debts to HMRC and their creditors, and they basically carry on. And what often happens is that the old company goes into liquidation, and we get the application from the new company, and before I've ever granted the new application, the directors simply carry on. The old company's gone out of business. It is no more. It has ceased to be. It is an ex-company. And yet the directors somehow seem to think that they can use the license of that defunct company for the new company. But of course you can't, because licenses are not transferable. And accountants who advise these directors on how to, you know, run a Phoenix or erect one, they don't have any knowledge of operator licensing law, so they don't spot that. I must say, when I see such a Phoenix application, my normal approach is to not hurry along with the application, because I don't think it should be, it's not right to simply sidestep debts in this way. So I do look at it closely, and you know, if your company went bust 5 years ago and you're making a new application now, well, that's fair enough, because it's not illegal for companies to go bust. That's the whole point of a company, so it can go bust without you having to incur debts personally. That's what founded company law. But where you've gone bust 2 days ago, or you're going bust next week, and you want a new license for, in all intents and purposes, the same operation, then I'm likely to delay that. And in any case, the vagaries of the application system mean that I can't grant an application immediately anyway, and you're likely to have to come to public inquiry. So there's going to be a gap of some months, and I am making sure that people do not operate their vehicles during those months. And with digital tachos, it's quite easy to ensure that now, and also with ANPR, which we can ask DVSA to look at. There was one instance a couple of weeks ago where actually it was a PSV company gone out of business and coming back as something slightly different. And oh yeah, my vehicles have just been there gathering dust in the yard. And you might have seen it in Route 1, I think it was reported this week. Just been gathering dust. They've moved 6 miles for MOT during the course of the last 6 months. So foolishly, and I'm never going to make this mistake again, I trusted him and I granted the license. I said, well, you know, I'm granting the license because you wouldn't be so stupid as to tell me it only moved 6 miles if the tacho tells me it's moving more. So I'll grant the license, but I would like the tacho data just to make sure. Well, next week the tacho data came in. The vehicle had actually moved 5,500 miles in the last few months, not 6. So I immediately revoked the license. I've created a world record because that guy only had a license for 10 days. So I think that's probably the shortest one. But that's taught me a lesson. No matter how convincing someone seems to be and how much against their interests it would be to lie to me, I'm going to wait in future until I get the actual evidence. Yes, well, where to find advice? It's the same old places. Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness is the Bible there. Senior Traffic Commissioner guidance. I don't know if you've seen the Traffic Commissioner written decisions. For the last year or so, they've been put up on our website now. So if you've got a quiet 20 minutes and want to laugh, just read one of those decisions. And the use, I suppose, is that by definition they are the difficult cases, the cases where a written decision has been necessary. Most of them we try to take oral decisions because otherwise we just couldn't keep up with the flow. So if I suspend or curtail a licence, it's very likely to be an oral decision given that day. Only if I revoke and disqualify am I likely to do a written decision. But the advantage of that for you is that you can see from these written decisions the kind of errors that people fall into. So I'm not suggesting you read all 500 cases on the website, but maybe pick 2 or 3 at random, it might give you a good idea of what's gone wrong with other people so that you don't fall into those traps yourself. Yes, that's it. I think I've overstepped by a couple of minutes. I apologise for that. But there's no shortage of non-compliant operators out there, sadly. So I think I'll be in business for some while yet. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
It's not really a question, it's a point of information. In March this year, the JAUPT insisted that all driver CPC modules now have a 15-minute section on bridge strikes. They're renewed annually, so by next March, every module on driver CPC will have a 15-minute section on bridge strikes.
Yes, well that's good news.
Yeah.
I suppose the less good news is that most drivers will leave it until 2024 to update their CPC, and that's one thing I find that both operators and drivers seem to assume that because most people, not everyone now, but still a good percentage of drivers have the 5-yearly 2019, 2024, etc. They can leave it 5 years or 4 years and 9 months and a few weeks to start thinking about their CPC. I think as operators and transport managers, I would encourage you to get your drivers to have an even spread of the 5 days training over the 5 years, not leave it all till the end. So, but that's encouraging that bridge strikes are out there, yes, as an issue. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions?
So we've talked about transport managers on standard national licenses. There are quite a few restricted operators here today as well. And we've talked about the CPC for a transport manager every 5 years and what have you. How does one sort of push forward the compliance matter to restricted operators? Because they seem to think they're a bit above the law and they tend to sort of not follow the same guidelines, albeit that they should do, like a standard national operator. So what's your opinion on that, and what should they be doing?
Well, you're right that restricted operators don't have by law to have a transport manager, but they're still bound by the same laws on roadworthiness of vehicles and drivers' hours as Eddie Stobart, Wincanton, Tesco, DHL, the really big operators. So you certainly need somebody in the business who understands the rules on those issues and who knows what to do in order to comply, which basically means a transport manager. Best practice would be to employ somebody with those skills, with that qualification, I feel, even though it's not legally mandatory. But even if someone hasn't got the actual exam, you need somebody who knows enough about it to do it properly. So somebody who's been trained at the very least, even if they haven't formally passed the exam. But I think the best practice would definitely be to employ a transport manager, or if you're a very small restricted operator, just with 1 or 2 vehicles, to qualify yourself. Because there are too many restricted operators out there, and I come across them every day, scaffolders, skip hire people quite often, who don't see the necessity to do this, and they then fall foul of the rules and come before me. So although having a professionally competent qualified transport manager is not a cheap option, it's a lot cheaper than losing your licence at a public inquiry or having your licence suspended for 14 or 28 days or whatever, and having to do all sorts of things thereafter. So it is something I would very strongly encourage restricted operators to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you for that. You got away lightly today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.